Hello and welcome to another lecture on qualitative research methods. My name is Ibrahim Osman Adam, and today we'll be looking at literature review. As part of today's lecture, our main focus will be to try and understand how one can conduct literature review for your research work. And to do that, we will try to understand the importance and purpose of literature review. We will first of all try to understand that when we are talking about literature review, we may look at it from two perspectives. We may look at the preliminary literature review, which may inform our ideas and search for a research topic. And then we also look at critical literature review, which will be an integral part of what we may do as part of our overall research project. We also try to understand how we can adopt a critical perspective in our reading, so that when we are going to conduct a literature review, it will be very helpful. One should also be able to know what is needed to be included when one is writing a critical literature review. At the end of the lecture, we should also be aware of the different sources one may rely on, the primary sources one may rely on, secondary and other sources one may rely on to search for literature. Then one should also be able to identify or use keywords to undertake a literature search using a range of methods. In today's technological environment, the most effective way of searching for literature is through Google search or Google Scholar. So we'll try to see how we can practically engage in a literature search using Google Scholar. One should also be able to evaluate the relevance, value, and sufficiency of the literature we have found and its relatedness to our research topic. Then one should also be able to reference the literature we have found in a very proper way. And referencing or managing our references is properly done these days with a referencing manager. So one may use EndNote, one may use Mendeley to be able to do this. And if we have time, we'll take a look at one of the softwares that we will use to manage our literature. Then finally, we also try to understand what we mean by plagiarism in the context of what? Academic research. Okay, now one may ask what a literature review is. Literature review basically is a review or a survey of research articles, books, and other academic written work and other information resources related to a particular topic one may want to write on. It involves a thorough process, where this thorough process will help us to identify gaps in research. And these gaps that we identify may serve as a justification for a research proposal, which we may use as a basis to conduct more in-depth investigation. Okay, so based on this brief understanding of what a literature review may entail, one may be wondering why we need to do literature review anyway. Now, we do literature review because we want to demonstrate our ability to be able to retrieve, seek, and evaluate, and as well as summarize the scholarly works we have found in terms of the literature on a particular topic. We are also doing that because we are also conducting literature review because we want to familiarize ourselves on a topic so that we can become better informed, and also we can write in a more academic and a proper way to be able to contribute to the discourse on that particular topic. Okay, now that I know briefly why a literature review should be conducted, it is important that we also have a fair idea as to how one can structure a literature review. So to begin with, one should be able to conceptualize that if you want to conduct a literature review, it should be structured in a particular way, especially when you want to write a literature review paper, which slowly would try to review literature from different sources on a particular topic and bring out some gaps in terms of theory, gaps in terms of methodology, and gaps in terms of other things. So generally, if one wants to do a literature review, it can be structured in many ways, but generally we want to have a look at some approach. To conduct a literature review, one can structure it in such a way that the first sections would look at an introduction, and in the introduction, you provide some background of the concepts and the literature you would want to look at. You also need to specify clearly the objectives of the literature review. Now, when this is clearly indicated, you also have to indicate your method. The method in terms of a literature review paper specifically is very critical. You need to clearly indicate how you are going to look for your literature, your search strategy, and also why you are including certain articles in the literature review process, the keywords you are using, and many other criteria you are following to be able to extensively review the literature. When this is done, you also have to look at consider a section under discussion, and the methods you would have employed in terms of your search strategy, the rationale for including some paper. You will have to go through the papers very carefully to be able to decipher whether there are some themes that run through the discussions that go in the literature you have looked at. So the emergent themes in the literature may be broken down into different sections in your literature review paper. Then maybe afterwards, after the discussion of the themes and the emergent gaps that you have seen, you may then conclude the paper. Okay, so this is just a brief generic guide. After that, you provide your reference list. Now, the next section is for us to look at how can one get started in this literature review process. You cannot go about trying to review literature when you don't have a topic. So to start with, you must first of all have a topic. And you remember we looked at how one can generate research ideas and how one can come up with a research topic. So to be able to look for literature, you must first of all have a topic. Then, after having a topic, you can then conduct a literature search. And the literature search can be conducted in you can find the literature from different sources. Something we'll extensively look at later. Now, after conducting a literature search, you also need to evaluate the literature you have found. The articles you have found, you need to be able to look at it critically and appraise the articles to be able to know their relevance and what other things you need to consider as part of your literature review process. Then you also need to analyze the articles, look for common or emergent themes, some agreements, some disagreement, oppositions, and bring out all these things under specific themes in your discussion. Okay. As part of the things to do to get started on your literature review process, I also want to provide some tips on writing a very good literature review. So we'll look at a number of issues. These are not exhaustive. So for instance, one can structure a review with headings to make it easier for readers to follow. And that is what I was saying earlier, that if you are able to retrieve literature, maybe from Google Scholar or whatever, you should be able to structure your review with some headings so that it will be easier for people to be able to follow. You should also be able to identify any points for discussion, such that in these points you have identified, there may be overriding agreements, there may be disagreement, oppositions, and whatnot. And all this will be very helpful. You also need to identify if further research is required based on what you have seen, whether further research is required. So it's a subjective process. You, as a researcher, will have to decide when you think the literature you have gathered is enough. It is also important that we try to distinguish between a literature review from a book review. Some of us may have heard of the term book review. These are two different things. Literature review is a process as part of the conduct of our research, where we try to review the literature, search exhaustively, search for literature in relation to a particular topic, try to find the issues that are being discussed, and try to identify the gaps that we get from the review process. This is completely different from a book review, where somebody has written a book and presents it to an expert in the field to have a look at the content of the book and provide some key comments in that regard. This is completely different. Then In our literature review process, we also have to know that we are not just reporting what the articles say or what the literature say, but we are interested in providing a discussion of the article's content in relation to other articles that we may have chosen for the review. So this discussion should be about comparing the findings from the findings from different articles, indicating the similarities and the differences in relation to the topic. In the previous slides, I've already indicated why it is important that we conduct literature review, but I want to touch on some other aspects in terms of that particular issue. The purpose of a literature review. Why do we have to do literature review at all? We do literature review for a number of reasons, but two major reasons exist. Two major reasons, according to Sharp and his colleagues. They indicate that there should always be a preliminary search, and the preliminary search helps us as researchers to be able to generate and do what? Refine our research ideas. And it is the research ideas, when they are properly refined, can help us to come up with a proper research topic. Then the second reason is that we conduct a critical review or a critical literature review. And this is what we consider as the critical part of what? Our research project, our thesis, our dissertation, or whatever. So going forward, we also need to understand that the literature review process is not a one-way process, so that you just finish and then you end there. It is an iterative process, and conceptually it may look like something as presented in this particular diagram. So you may have your objectives, your questions, and whatnot. Then you may define the parameters. What are you going to consider in searching for literature? Then the process may lead to you generating the search terms. So, for instance, if my topic is on the critical success factors in the diffusion of maybe e-commerce, so I have to generate search terms. So maybe I'll look for diffusion, e-commerce, critical success factors. This may be the search terms that I will need to be able to search for the literature on this particular topic. Then the next thing will be that I conduct the literature search. When I conduct the literature search, it will lead me to obtaining some number of literature. I will then evaluate the literature, record them, and then I may also try to generate other search terms again to see if I will be able to find more content. After that, I can then start drafting the review. Once in a while, I may generate and refine my search terms. So you see that generating and refining the search terms is a continuous process, because the literature can continuously be updated until a particular time. So this update process will continue. So it's a cyclical process, and it goes on and on and on and on until I have a written critical review product, which is the literature review chapter or the literature review section of my academic paper. So it's an iterative process. It goes back and forth instead of a straight line process. Okay, so as part of my literature review process, it is especially the critical review. The main agenda of the critical literature review is to help you as a researcher to identify theories, concepts, and frameworks and other ideas that will help you to test your data, to test using the data you have gathered. And when we do that, we always say that we are following a deductive process or a deductive approach. When we identify theories and our main objective is to test using the data we have, then we are conducting some sort of a deductive research. However, if we want to explore the data to develop or come up with theory, we are not just testing, so that from them we will be able to subsequently relate to the literature. Then we'll say that we are conducting what? An inductive research, or the approach is what? Inductive. So the purpose of the literature review is not just to provide us with a summary of everything that has been written on a particular topic, but to help us to review the most relevant and significant issues in relation to what? That particular topic. So, to be able to conduct an effective critical literature review, we need to adopt a critical perspective when we are reading the articles, the books, and other things that we may come across as part of our literature review. So how do we adopt a critical perspective in our reading? To do that, we look at a number of issues. The first is to look at the issue of previewing. When we say previewing, basically we are looking at the concept of looking around the text, the article, before you even start reading, in order to establish precisely the purpose, and how it may inform our literature. So you may just look at the topic, the title, you may look at the keywords, you may look at the abstract, and then you'll be able to decide whether this particular paper will inform your research or not before you even proceed to read it. Now, when you have done that, the next thing is to be able to annotate. And annotation will involve what? Conducting a dialogue with yourself, the author, the one who wrote the paper, and the issues and ideas in the paper that are at stake in terms of what you want to research. When you are able to do this annotation process, you may also engage in what we call summarizing. And the best way to determine what that you really have gotten to this point is to be able to state it in your whatever you have seen in your own way. So you can annotate by underlying certain things in the article you have indicated, either by using a highlighter, a marker, or something, and then after that you will then summarize it. When you have done the summarizing, the next aspect for you to do will be to compare and contrast. And to do this, you need to ask yourself how your thinking has changed by reading this particular paper, or how has it affected your response to that particular issue. Maybe you may have some initial ideas, but after reading the paper, it may have changed. Now, outlining the argument of the text in your own version. This can be done quite informally, maybe at the margins of the text you are reading. So at the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the paper, you may make comments. These days, because of the advancement in technology, it is easier for you to be able to make the comments on the soft copy of your document, on your computer, on your phone, or on your tablet. You can do that. Okay. So other critical things we have to look at, according to Wallace and Ray, they sum up this particular critical review perspective, reading perspective, in two. They say that the capacity for you to be able to evaluate what you read and the capacity to relate to what you have read to other information. More specifically, what you should be doing is you should be asking yourself some critical questions when you are reading a journal article. So, for instance, you may be asking yourself, why am I reading this? You know, when you look at the topic, look at the abstract, the keywords, you should be able to decide whether it fits your research domain or your research interest or area before you even proceed to do what? To read it. So you should be asking yourself, why am I reading this particular paper? Then, you should also ask yourself, what is the author trying to do in writing this? Then, you can also look at what is the writer saying that's relevant to what I have found out. How convincing is the author's arguments? So, in particular, is the argument based on a conclusion which is justified by the evidence presented by the author? Then you then ask yourself, finally, what use can I make of the reading in terms of your research topic? If you are able to answer these questions in relation to a particular paper critically under review, or when you are reading it, you will be able to tease out some critical things that can form part of your literature review process. So when you are adopting a critical perspective in your reading, one other thing that is important is what is the content of the critical review? What is the content of the critical review? In considering the content of your critical review as part of your thesis, dissertation, you need to understand the following. You need to include the key theories within your chosen area. You need to also demonstrate that your knowledge of your chosen area is up to date. So you cannot be doing a critical review of the literature when you are relying on literature published 10, 15, 16 years ago. You should be relying on what? Contemporary literature. The literature should be what? Recent. It should be up to date. Now, you should also be able to do clear referencing, proper referencing, and enable those reading your project work or your report to see that whatever you are doing is what? Original. You cannot copy somebody's work and present it as if it is what? Your own. So you need to be able to what? Cite properly. So you need to be able to do that in a very clear way. And citing is a critical aspect of the literature review process that we all need to pay particular attention to. And we'll take a look at some of these issues when we are looking at the issue of referencing as part of our critical literature review process. So I have distinguished between two types of review. A preliminary review, which will help us to generate what? Our research ideas, and a critical review. In the last few slides, I have been mentioning the issue of critical literature review. What is really meant by being critical about our literature. When we say we should be critical about literature, what we mean is that we should be able to appraise or evaluate a problem with the effective use of what? The language, our language, and critique whatever other artists may have what? May have done. We should also be able to use our skills both in what? Making reasoned judgments and arguing effectively in our writing. We should have a questioning approach where justification exists to do so. When we are questioning anything, we should have the justification. We should have the justification to do so. And finally, it is likely also to include recognizing in our review that the knowledge and information we are discussing are not value-free. The critique of what? Object. And that's what we mean by the critique of what? Objectivity. Okay. So what should then be the structure of a critical literature review? There's no single structure that your critical review should take. There's no particular structure that everybody would adopt. But we often say that the critical literature review process should be seen in terms of what? A funnel. You know, when you look at a funnel, at the very top, it is wide. And as you go down, it narrows down into a small hole. So we can start our critical literature review with this particular concept of a funnel in mind. So you start, and basically what it means is that you start at a more general level before narrowing down to your specific research questions and what? Your objectives. So to be able to look at issues at a general level, it means that you should be able to provide a brief overview of the key issues, key ideas, and key themes. And then you summarize, compare, and contrast the research as you go on, because you are the schema of the whole thing. And as you go on, you should be able to narrow down to highlight what previous research has conducted, what they have left out, and what you are intending to do. You should also be able to provide a detailed account of the findings of other work that has been done, and show how they are related to yours and how they have limitations, and highlight those aspects where your research will provide fresh insights to address some of the limitations that they may have, the limitations their work may be posing. Okay. Now, the next thing we need to look at is, where do I find my literature? Where do I find literature sources? You can find your literature from several different sources. You can find your literature. We have primary sources, secondary sources, and others refer to what we call tertiary sources. So the primary sources are usually reports, theses of your seniors, and written and submitted by your seniors. It could also be emails. It could be what? Conference proceedings. It could be company reports and published manuscripts and many government publications and many others. These are primary sources of literature. They also have secondary sources, which are general articles, books, newspapers, and some government publications may also be part of that. Then finally, we have tertiary sources, which includes indexes, abstract catalogs, encyclopedias, dictionaries, and whatnot. So you see that as we move towards, as we move from tertiary sources to the primary source, there's increasing level of detail in terms of what is contained. Then as we move from primary to tertiary sources, we say that there's increasing time for what is publication. The duration of its publication is usually a bit much more longer. This is not so much relevant to the context of what our literature review. Okay. Now, how can one plan our literature review? To plan our literature review, we must always have what? A literature search strategy. So how do we go about looking for the literature? So before starting, we should be able to write down a clearly spelled out what? Literature search strategy. If possible, you can discuss your search strategy with your supervisor. And this should include a number of things, some of which are the parameters of your search. What are the things you are going to look out for? Which keywords are you going to consider? What are the search terms you intend to use? Which databases are you going to look at? Which search engines are you going to look at? Are you going to just look at Google Scholar, or you are going to look at InderScience as a database? You are going to look at Science Direct. There are many other databases that are around. Then you should also be able to tell the criteria you intend to use to select the relevant and useful studies from all the items you may have found. This is because if you have determined your search parameters and the keywords you want to use, and you go to the database and search, a lot of results will be returned, and you will need to be able to use a criteria to sieve out what you want from the lot that may have been returned as part of your search results. So your literature review search would probably be conducted using a variety of approaches. You can search using tertiary sources, you can search using primary sources, you can obtain relevant literatures referenced in books and journals that you have already read. You can scan and browse secondary literature in your library, you can search using the internet, and many others. Now, I want to briefly look at searching using the internet, because that is what is much more contemporary, relevant, and more technologically relevant in our search for literature. Okay, so searching using the internet, this is going to be a major discussion as part of our literature review process. So, hello. Since searching for our literature using the internet is going to be one of our primary approaches to be able to get our relevant literature for our review process, we want to spend a lot of time to discuss how we can look for our literature. We can search for our literature using the internet. To be able to conduct a literature search, a literature review using Google or the internet, our specific focus would be on how we can use what we refer to as Google Scholar, which is a database for scholarly and academic work, to be able to conduct research, literature search much more effectively. With the aid of Google Scholar and with the support of other search tips and search strategies, one will be able to conduct an effective literature search without necessarily visiting a library physically. So, for instance, one may combine a number of search terms and link the search terms with what we refer to as Boolean operators. And a number of Boolean operators will be discussed. Some of the Boolean operators we would discuss and use are AND, OR, NOT, truncation, as well as the use of wildcards. Now, we use the Boolean term AND to be able to narrow our search. For example, if we want to look at or search for literature that contains the search term recruitment interviewing skills, we can separate the search terms, or we can separate the search terms by the word AND in capital. So if we search for recruitment and interviewing and skills, it will return, our search results will be returned using only articles containing all the three keywords we have selected. So if I am searching using Google Scholar and I type in recruitment and interviewing and skills, the articles that will be returned will be articles that contains the word recruitment, the word interviewing, and the word skills. Alternatively, I can also use OR as a Boolean operator. And when I do that, when I use OR, it will widen my search. So for instance, if I was looking for a literature on recruitment selection, and I separate the two terms, recruitment and selection, by the linking term or the Boolean operator OR, the outcome will be that it will return articles with at least one of the keywords. So it will return articles with at least the word recruitment or the word selection in them. I can also use NOT as a Boolean operator. And when I use NOT, it excludes the terms from the search. So I can, if I'm looking for the term recruitment, and I know that recruitment and selection are similar, and I use the word NOT. So in such an instance, my search term will be recruitment, not selection. And when that happens, the search result that will be returned will be articles that contain the keyword recruitment, but do not contain the keyword selection, because I'm excluding the word selection. I can also use truncation, and truncation is used. It uses words to pick up the different variants of a particular word. So, for instance, we have motivate, we have motivation, we have motivated, and whatnot. So, if I am and you realize that all these words starts with motivate. So, motivate starts with that, motivation starts with that, motivated starts with that, motivating starts with that. So, if I do that, what happens is that it will return such results that contain these initial letters motivate, and the outcome will be select articles with motivate, select articles that contain motivation. It will bring out articles that contain motivating and whatnot. The last one is what we refer to as a wildcard, and wildcards are used because we have different spellings for some particular words. For instance, labor can be spelled as labor in the American context. It can also be spelled as labor. Similar then is behavior and many other words. So if I want to search using such a word which has different variants of spelling, then I can remove the letter in the word that causes the variance and replace it with a question mark. In that case, I'm doing a wildcard search. When I do that, it will return articles that contains the words in its variant form. So, for instance, if it is labor, it will return articles that contains labor spelled as labor, and labor, and articles containing the word labor spelled as what? Labor. Now, I would do another video that will practically demonstrate how these Boolean operators can be used to look for literature in the next session. Okay, so now the other critical component is how do I record my literature? In addition to making notes, Sharp et al. Identified that there are 3 sets of information one needs to record as part of the literature review process. The first one is the bibliographic details. The other one is what? Brief summary of the content, and the other will be the other supplementary information. We'll look at how we can record that. These days, the easiest way to do that would be to use what? A reference manager such as Mendeley, such as what? EndNote. So in managing a literature, one can rely on a number of them. EndNote and Mendeley are the most popular ones, but others are also the reference manager, reference as a software, Zotero, and many others. In this particular program, I will urge that you concentrate on either learning how to use EndNote and Mendeley. In subsequent days, I would be holding a seminar on how to use Mendeley in the academic cycle. So I invite all of you to sign up to my seminar, and this will be an avenue for you to learn how to practically use a referencing manager to be able to manage your literature and other things. Thank you very much, and this is the end of our first part of lecture on literature review. The other part will be how one can conduct a literature review using what? Google Scholar as your main search strategy. Thank you very much for listening.